All right. Today is July the 2nd, 2020, and I'm here today with Stephen Denny. He's running for Court of Appeals, Place 4, right? And welcome.
Thanks for having me, Dan. This is great. You've really done wonders with the room since I was here last time.
Yeah, thanks. I guess we'll just jump right into it. Why do you want to be an appeals court judge?
Well, it's kind of a funny thing. Last summer, around about August, I found out that Justice Campbell was retiring. I'd run into somebody, and then I just went straight to him and said, "Is this true?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm hanging it up." And I looked at the timeline and knew that the filing period would be opening in that November. So I went ahead and appointed a treasurer last August and started garnering support. And I sought the governor's appointment. Another couple of people did that as well. And then 4 days before the filing period opened, they appointed someone else. And so that's when I found out that I was going to need to run for the office. But the interest came because that's the sort of work I've done. I do criminal trial work, I've done some family law and civil law, and I also do, with a very limited number of people in this area, I do appeal work. So as you start looking at the likely candidates of who would be a good representative for the Republican Party in that office, you know, four out of the five lawyers that were doing appeals are just left as left can be, as you find with the legal profession quite a bit. And so then I started going around to the district judges to see if they were interested in it and were going to seek that spot. And I couldn't find anybody that I thought would do a good job that was interested in doing it. So kind of out of duty that we need a good conservative voice on that court, I decided that that's what I was going to do. After filing the treasurer appointment, you know, it was possible that the governor found somebody that I didn't know about that was going to be a good choice for it. But unfortunately, the governor didn't find a good conservative choice, and I decided it was right for me to still pursue that.
Very good. So the Court of Appeals, they meet in Amarillo, right?
The office is actually housed in Amarillo, and there's no set statute that says it has to be there, but it traditionally has been. They've planned for new space for them in the new Potter County Justice Building that they're going to build if they can ever get around to it. There are 4 justices on that court: the Chief Justice, Quinn, who's from Lubbock, Justice Parker, who's from Lubbock, and then traditionally there have always been 2 spots that were held by Amarillo attorneys. Justice Pirtle has one of those, and then Justice Campbell was one of the Amarillo spots. And so when Justice Parker was appointed, I'm not aware of any Amarillo attorneys that applied for that spot because it was traditionally the spot held by a Lubbock judge. And so I was quite surprised to find out someone from Lubbock was considered and even appointed to hold that spot. They do meet all over, though. I mean, Texas Tech hosts the court several times a year. I've actually participated in oral arguments at high schools, in different open areas like that. I like the initiative of the court to get it out and let people see what they do, because a lot of the appeals court is done, I don't want to say behind the scenes, but it's behind closed doors that most people don't even know to go to, including lawyers. So they do get out and move about throughout the 46 county district, but for the most part, they're housed here.
Well, you've already won this race once, right?
I did. Back in March 3rd, we had the Republican primary with all the 13 candidates for congressional seat and everybody else. And that night, I didn't have a watch party because I knew we had such a large district, 46 counties, and some of those counties don't even have websites. And so I didn't even have a watch party. I knew that the results would be dragging in throughout the night. And so as I'm sitting there on my couch watching the local election results, a grass fire went out, so I left. I went to the grass fire, threw my phone to my wife and said, "Please answer my friends when they text," whatever. And so I didn't even know I had won until I got back at 4 o'clock in the morning from going to that grass fire and found out that I'd won by several hundred votes. But we also noticed that there was a problem. And what that problem turned out to be is that 2 counties, Cochran and Collingsworth, didn't have our election on their ballot at all. And upon further investigation, it was probably whenever they upgraded their software at the Secretary of State, they probably just didn't include those counties where they should have. Later on, I was sued by my opponent in an election contest and defended that. They assigned a judge from out of this district as the statute requires. That judge said, I can't tell who won, and even though I had won by 297 votes that were cast out of 91,000 people, he said, I can't tell who won because these 1,200 people didn't get to vote, didn't get to be heard. My argument was that not one of those 1,200 people even bothered to mention that they were there to vote for either one of us and weren't given the opportunity. I argued that the ballots were on display for the requisite amount of time per the Texas statutes, and none of us bothered to go look and see if we were on the ballot, and that in effect we waived it and the voters waived that error. The Republican Party agreed with me. Chairman Dickey got on a conference call with their counsel and their primary counsel and me and my opponent, and basically said, we're going to certify that Steve was the winner because he won the election, and these other counties, either the voters or the candidates should have complained about it before now, because this is an extraordinary remedy, and it's not really fair to those 91,000 voters to redo this because of the dismal turnout that we usually have in runoffs. But that's when the lawsuit was filed after that. The judge sided with my opponent. I then appealed it, and then the Fort Worth Court of Appeals that was assigned sided with my opponent as well, and they ordered that we redo the entire election. So that's where I'm at now. We're not in a runoff, but we're with the runoffs with our redo.
So it's a brand new, whole new election.
Brand new election, and in fact, the Secretary of State, the Ethics Commission, everybody is kind of off guard with the thing. It occurred to me that since it was a new election, I probably was supposed to file different finance reports than what they were asking me to online, and so I had to call the Ethics Commission and get a couple of attorneys there to look at it, and they agreed with me that since it's a new election, all of the campaign finance stuff resets as if the first one never happened. So the limits reset, but the reporting resets. You have to file the 30-day report and the 8-day report and then the daily reports, where you don't have to do all that stuff with a runoff traditionally.
Sounds like a real pain.
You have no idea. I mean, well, I think you do know, because I mean you're
I have to
intimately
deal with it.
involved. But it's just so frustrating because I ran the race with my whole heart. I did everything I could. I talked to every person I could find that had a question about the race or the candidates. I went to everything. I drove to every county that I could get to. I appeared at every forum. I printed things. I drew on my car. I stood and got blisters on my feet and my hands at early voting and election day, waving at people and showing signs and putting signs out and then gathering signs up. I went and picked up the majority of my signs, with an exception of a few that I had permission to leave for that period of time because of the question. But I ran across the finish line, and proverbially I collapsed as we went over, hoping to just lay there and rest for a minute. And as it turns out, I didn't get that. Kicked me in the ribs and told me that was just the warm up, and I needed to actually run the race now. So
Yep.
that's where I'm at now. But we're still fighting. We're still going everywhere. We're still meeting great voters all across the district, and it's going great. I'm having a lot more fun with it this time because I've got the confidence that out of the 91,000 people, I won. More than half of the people that voted said, Steve, you're the best candidate. And that's a great affirmation of what I'm doing, that says they agree with what I'm talking about. They agree with my values. They agree with what I think that court should be. And so I've really gotten a good breath of air to run the re-election, or the redo.
Well, I think the average voter, and even above average voters, most of them don't know what the Court of Appeals does. Can you explain what
Sure.
the role of the Court of Appeals is?
Well, and to their credit, most lawyers probably don't understand what the Court of Appeals does either. In the 7th District, with the 46 counties, if you go to court in any county court at law or district court or have a jury proceeding or anything like that, you're likely to have the right to appeal whatever happens at that. In other words, you're saying, I want a redo. And the redo, the do-over, goes to the Seventh Court of Appeals if you're in that district. And so you file your notice of appeal, and that could be off of an interlocutory order that was in the middle of your trial. It might be after a jury trial. It might be after a hearing. It might be after a termination on a parental rights deal. But you tell the Court of Appeals, I disagree with what happened in the lower court, and I want you guys to review it and see if what happened was according to the law or not. So once the appeal is filed, each side gets the opportunity to prepare a brief. And the best way to put it, it's like a book report over what happened. It says, this was wrong, this was right, this is what should have happened, this happened and shouldn't have, that sort of thing. And then the other side gets to write their own brief, and you go back and forth if you want to for a brief period of time. But then the Court of Appeals assigns 3 out of the 4 justices I mentioned to a panel. That panel then decides if they think listening to the parties in person would be beneficial. Most of the time they say no, and they just decide it based on the written materials. And then they issue what's called an opinion. Many people have heard opinions before, whether they know it or not. If you've ever heard of Roe versus Wade or Obergefell or Citizens United or Sebelius or any of those opinions that affect your daily lives, or could, Miranda versus Arizona, those are opinions. And so the Seventh Court of Appeals may not have as many famous ones, but they definitely have binding authority on any other case filed. So if that Seventh Court says in one case, this is what the law means in this area, then that's what it means to everybody that appeals their case to that, until another court of equal jurisdiction, one of the other 14 appeals courts in Texas, says the Seventh Court got this wrong, we're going to say it means this, and then you have a conflict of laws and it would go to a higher court. And that's where it's bifurcated. The Seventh Court of Appeals hears all the cases: criminal, civil, family, contract disputes, parental terminations. More than half of their work is criminal, though. But then after that, if you decide, I don't like what the Court of Appeals did, you can then appeal it to the Court of Criminal Appeals if it's a criminal case, or the Supreme Court if it's some other type of case.
So if somebody has a case and it's ruled on by the Court of Appeals, that's basically the law in this jurisdiction of 46 counties, until there's a similar case in a different appeals court that they look at this Court of Appeals case to see what they did, and if they don't agree, that's when it becomes a point of contention?
It could be, or if the parties say, I think they got it wrong enough, I want to ask for a discretionary review above this court. So they could ask them to review it in the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court or the Court of Criminal Appeals. They could ask them to review it. But until there's a conflict, there's not really a impetus to make that happen. But the whatever that decision is, that becomes the law for that area. So if you have judicial activists, they could do any number of things and then say this is the law that applies to the Panhandle of Texas, and instead of having your legislators vote on whatever it is that they want to happen, you've had 3 people that were never intended to be legislatures making laws.
So you have 4 justices, and then when the cases go before them, they get divided into panels of 3?
Yeah, the panels are just switched up so that you don't have the same 3 every time, and it's just randomly assigned from what I've been told based on the filings. And I'm not saying that the 4-judge panel here is doing judicial activism. I'm just using that as an example. It could be any court. Mm-hmm. Some of the other courts at Fort Worth and Dallas, they may have 7 or 8, 10 judges assigned to their court, but they always get the 3-judge panel. You have an option in some cases that you could ask for the court, all of the court, to hear it, and then in this case you're just adding 1 judge. But if you lost in 2-1, say in an 8-judge court, and you thought maybe you had better support if you had gotten some more judges on there, you could ask for the en banc review, and then they would review it as the entire court if they wanted to.
Well, that's interesting. So the district that the Seventh Court, can you define those boundaries for the?
Well, the quick and dirty that I tell people on the campaign is it's from Texline to Tahoka and then all the way east to Vernon. That's basically it. But you go all the way to Plains, if anybody knows where that is. You know, there's a couple hundred people that vote out there. It goes all the way up to the edge where New Mexico and Oklahoma meet. It goes entire panhandle over to Shamrock and Wheeler, Memphis, Clarendon, Wellington. Vernon is included in it, Wilbarger County. So there's just this huge district, and in driving it, it's really kind of fun to see. You know, we kind of get used to our terrain up here, but you know, some of that terrain just gets really beautiful. And I'm out here fighting a grass fire every other day in Amarillo, and I'm terrified about fireworks. And you know, 100 miles east of here in Wellington, it's green as can be, and just lush garden spot because of the rain they've gotten. As the clouds go over the Cap Rock, I guess that changes the makeup, and they get the rain and we don't.
Yeah, I think for every, I forget how many miles it is. Well, I know in I-35, every 10 miles you go east, an inch more rain per year, and west is an inch less.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's just nuts. And I believe it because as I travel around, the farther east I go, the greener it got. So I'm jealous for their fire departments for sure, that
Yeah.
they're not having to fight all these wildfires.
Yeah, I was hoping we'd get some of that climate change. Maybe it'd help us out a little bit.
Yeah, I
get
think
some more rain.
I've never wanted to agree with the liberals, but I guess if I had to agree on something, it might be that. But I'd want it to get colder if it were me. I'm more of a winter guy.
Well, of course, that's probably off the subject of why we're here, but you know, global warming is actually a good thing.
Yeah.
Because when you have warmer weather, that gets you more rain, you have more production.
Yeah.
Civilizations throughout history have actually expanded during periods of global warming, and when you have global cooling, which is typically all that I believe is controlled by the sun.
Sure, of course it is.
And periods of global cooling is when civilizations fail, shrink, go into the dark ages. You have pandemics, you have disease, you have starvation,
Yeah,
and civilizations collapse.
yeah.
Why they think we're going into global cooling, I don't know, but from what's going on right now, maybe there's something to the global. I think we're going into global cooling.
It's
not
actually
global
cooling
warming.
off rather than warming up.
Yeah.
From the way the society looks.
Yep, and I think the way the scientists think we're actually going into global cooling.
Yeah. Well, the legitimate scientists.
Right. So to me, it's a problem. We should pray for global warming. So let's tell the voters where you grew up and tell us your story, how you became an attorney and what got you interested in law.
Sure. I was born right here in Amarillo. If you've been here for any length of time, I was born in High Plains Baptist Hospital before they joined with the St. Anthony's. You know, I grew up on the east side of Amarillo, went to Caprock and Bowie and Lawndale and Oakdale. I ended up graduating from Tascosa and just loved the area. I was able to get a job out at the USDA research farm at Bushland. I worked as a heavy equipment mechanic and put myself through college at WT, and got my degree there, bachelor's degree in speech communication in 3.5 years. It's where I met my wife of now 25 years. We met in debate class, and my team was versus her team in the final round of that debate class. And of course, my team won, but unfortunately, that was the last debate I ever won with her. So it has its price. You know, WT didn't have a law school, so I had to find somewhere else to go. I looked at University of Houston, but just did not like the thought of living in Houston. I looked at University of Texas, but did not like the thought of going to such a liberal place. And so whenever I visited Texas Tech, it just fit. It was people that thought like me and looked like me and uh, liked to learn and weren't there for political aspirations and weren't there to push their agenda. They were there to learn the law, and we got a great education there. So I graduated from Tech. I worked while I was in law school the whole time, despite them telling you can't do that. They didn't want to pay for my way, so I had to disregard that instruction. I sold computers at Circuit City first, before they went out of business, and then moved over to Sears and sold sewing machines and vacuums, microwaves. I actually learned to sew there because it helped when the ladies came in wanting to know the difference between the machines. It gave you a little more credibility if you knew what you were talking about. So I learned how to sew and how to embroider and all that. I moved over to electronics, did that for a while, and then I got a job working for a criminal defense lawyer as a law clerk. And so I worked for him for a while. After I graduated, I liked what I was doing, so I opened my business there in Lubbock. Had a very successful business. My wife was a teacher at Lubbock High School. And then we had our son, Grant, who's 17 now, and decided he really deserved to be around his grandparents more than we were able to let him, living 2 hours away. So we moved back to Amarillo and got him closer to Melissa's parents and my parents. I was able to get a job as a prosecutor here. I worked for Randall Sims, the 47th DA, for a number of years. I was in charge of the grand jury for a while, so I know what goes into presenting cases and what goes into that, which is normally a secret proceeding. I was in a trial court for a while that had the highest load of criminal cases for that office, and I didn't even keep track of how many cases I tried as a prosecutor. At some point, I got the opportunity through some contacts that had done contract work, and I was able to go to Afghanistan as a contractor for the Department of State. I spent most of my time in Jalalabad, but also traveled around the state to Kandahar and Kunduz and Kabul and just all over. My job was to learn the Afghan law that the coalition had put together and then go out and train judges and prosecutors and appeals judges, police officers on how to apply that new law. And then after those people came to our classes, my job was to mentor them and make sure that they understood what they were doing, they were applying the law properly. Once I got done doing that, I spent about 8 months in Afghanistan doing that. It paid pretty well to get shot at and people trying to blow you up while you're doing that job. And so, excuse me, I came back home and was able to open my criminal defense practice again, and I've been doing that ever since.
Well, it'd be fascinating to do that over in Afghanistan. I bet that was an interesting experience.
It really was. You know, that would probably be a complete other show with as much as I've got to talk about. But, you know, the funny thing is after you learn all of their laws, you start to see the differences between what they were doing before and what they're doing now. And in the mentoring part, you learn why some of the things that the people that created that legal system, why they're not going to work. You know, one of the things that was pretty heavy beforehand was the tribal system. The religious leader was very intimately involved in the legal system, and the coalition didn't include those people in the system that they tried to replace it with. And so part of my frustration was getting the elected officials, the appointed officials, other agents to support the coalition government and not what their religious leader was telling them to do.
It didn't mesh with their culture.
It didn't. It was, and they probably should have spent more time trying to integrate what they were used to into the system and try and make it, rather than try and force the Italian system, which is basically what it turned out to be. The Italians had a pretty big hand in writing that law, so it has a pretty Italian flavor to it.
Yeah, it's hard.
The most surprising part is if you go have a jury trial, everybody can appeal the first one. the prosecutor, the defendant, and the victim. So the first trial, very few people even showed up to for most of the time. So you had to wait until you got further down the road before anybody even cared.
Well, I figure maybe they figure if they do it enough times, they'll finally get it right.
Yeah, somebody will give up, I think
Yeah.
is what their goal was.
Just wear them out.
Well, it was actually, it was kind of neat knowing all that I knew about that system and how it's set up. I believe it was, I may be wrong about the name, but I think it was Amanda Knox was charged in Italy. And I would see something on the news and I'd be like, oh, well, this is no big deal. This is just her first trial. They shouldn't have even reported on that. And then Melissa would be sitting there, what are you talking about? I said, yeah. This isn't a real trial. They're going to have a real trial later, but this isn't it. And sure enough, 6 months later, she'd be in the news again. Like, see, I told you, that wasn't the real trial. This is the real one.
I guess that's the Italian way, huh?
It makes sense to them, I guess.
All right. So what made you interested in becoming an attorney?
You know, I've been asked that a lot. Even before, you get called to go do classes to kids and school age kids or Boy Scouts or whatever. And I can't really tell you why. I was lucky to know from a very early age that I wanted to be a lawyer. But it's funny, I go back and there's no lawyers in my family. My mom went to paralegal school at Amarillo College once I started grade school, but that was even before, I wanted to be a lawyer even before that. I didn't necessarily like legal shows or anything. I didn't want to be Matlock or anything like that, but I wanted to be, I guess I wanted to argue. I don't know. So I was lucky to know that was it. I've never wanted to be anything else. But I will say, in all honesty, whenever young people come up to me and tell me they want to go to law school, I tell them to be orthodontists. I think there's a lot of positives there. You can be rich and whatnot. Because as a lawyer, it's a pretty frustrating area of work if you think about it. Because in almost everything I do, there's someone else trying to undo what I'm trying to get accomplished in everything. Yeah. If you're a carpenter or a plumber or whatever, there's no one that comes in after you're done and takes the pipes apart. You would hope. I mean, if there were, that'd be a nightmare. But it really is surgeons, you have nature working against you and all that, but there's nobody going in and trying to sabotage your surgery other than the patient themselves. And so law can be very frustrating, and I know that a lot of people struggle with that. And so that's why I tell kids to think about something else, because if you're going to go into law, you really need to be sold on it. I love it. I love what I do, and I can't understand why I do, and that's why I always caution people to be sure this is what you want, because it's a pretty substantial investment of time and money and effort to get to the point where I'm at now. You really have to be convinced that's what you want to do.
You have to be able to think.
It helps. I know a bunch of lawyers who don't think, so I'm not going to say it's a requirement, but it helps you be successful if you can think.
Yeah. Some people can and some people can't. So who's your favorite Supreme Court justice?
No question, Justice Scalia. I love him. I've met him on 2, maybe 3 times before he died. Absolute favorite. I love reading his opinions. I love the rhetoric that he uses. I love that he doesn't hold back. He tells you what he thinks. He's like that in person also. And what I love about him is he is consistent. I got a question the other day about, which justice on the court now do you like the most? And my response was, I can't answer that, because as we've seen with Justice Roberts, people sometimes change. They're not consistent. So if I tell you now that I like a certain justice, I may not agree with that person 3 years from now, because they may have some life-altering event that changes their entire outlook. And so I can't say I like this person or that person. I can confidently say while Justice Scalia was alive, I could stick with him. He was not going to change. And the reason is his entire judicial philosophy was based on his upbringing and his moral values. You know, he took what he actually believed spiritually and in his core. That is what his judicial philosophy was based on. It wasn't based on what people wanted to hear. It wasn't based on, I think this is right now, or, you know, the tides might change and I might be different. It was, this is who I am, and this is what goes along with my philosophy. So even if he were alive, he would be the only one I'm confident I could say, this guy, I will agree with almost everything that he does. I miss him. I wish he were around. I truly think that was the biggest loss we've had on that court in a very long time.
Yeah, I think if more people had that moral conviction and stood on principles, we'd have a lot less problems.
Well, I agree, and that's kind of where I've been coming from all along. You know, I've heard people talk about their endorsements in this and other races. You know, these people have said I'm a good guy, and this person appointed me, so you should vote for me. And I haven't pursued any of that. I had in other races. I got the police officers and the firemen and everybody to do an endorsement. And in praying and sitting and thinking about this, it occurred to me that that's not what's important. It's not important to me that Dan Rogers wants to vote for me and you know, is going to come out in public and say vote for Denny, or that the governor or the president or whoever. What's important is that I'm able to communicate to you, to tell you, I am a born-again Christian at 14 years old. I was baptized, I believe in God, and I believe in the salvation through Christ. And that's who I believe in. That I devoted substantial amount of time to that. The first thing in the morning when I get out of the bed is devoted to that, to pursuing that end. And that is what shapes the rest of my day. That shapes how I interact with other people throughout my day. And so whenever I tell you this is how I live my life, this is how I spend my time, this is who I volunteer with, this is the group that I think warrants me spending time away from my family in order to make the world better, those things are what you or any other voter can look at and go, you know what? Steve's not just blowing smoke. He's not telling me to vote for him because he's popular. Look at this. When nobody's looking at him, he's working with the chainsaw team at his church. He's standing in the hallway on the safety team at his church, making sure that no one comes in to harm people while they're trying to worship. He goes on campouts with the Boy Scouts so that they have sponsors. He teaches archery at a diabetes camp. I mean, those are all things that I do because I think they're worthwhile. I'm on 3 or 4. I lose track of how many charitable boards I'm on because, you know, I've been blessed with people that invested in me throughout my life. Each person that took the time to teach me something or take me on a camp out or explain how to use the fire truck or whatever it is, someone has invested in me. And if I don't use that to help others down the road, I feel like I've failed those people. And man, damn, there's a lot of people behind me that have done that. I got a lot of people to let down if I don't do the right thing. And so that's why I haven't really focused on endorsements or other people. I've focused on, look, this is who I am. Either you agree with my upbringing or you don't, but I'm not going to change it for you. I can't change it for you. There is no way, and that's why I've said from the beginning, I would never vote for a Democrat primary. There's no reason for me to be there because I, at the core of my belief and value system, disagree with several of their principal tenets. I may agree with them on some kind of fringe things that they agree on. I may be lighter on some things than other people want me to be. I may be tougher on some things than other things. But whenever you get down to the core beliefs of Republican versus Democrat, I can't agree with them on core issues, and I will never side with them on those things. And so when I'm looking at candidates, that's what I want to know. Do you have a value system in place that's going to help you make decisions, or are you just trying to get my vote so that you can collect a paycheck. I mean, I don't even, honestly, I don't know the exact amount that what this job even pays. I know that it pays enough that I can pay my bills. And that's what's important to me. Other than that, I don't really care.
So what type of law do you practice?
Mostly it's criminal. I'll help out friends and family in special cases for termination suits of children, divorces. I've done a few divorces, got, you know, a few of those. I've done some very large litigation suits against corporations and trucking companies and things like that. Recently, because of the COVID shutdown, I've decided to go back into doing some wills and estate planning things because that's on people's mind. And unfortunately, for society, we're not arresting people that are committing crimes unless they're DWIs or violent crimes. And so the business on the criminal side is pretty much shut down. So I'm kind of gone back to the estate stuff for now as well.
So you say we're not arresting people that are committing crimes?
It's extremely difficult to get a jail in Texas to accept a arrestee right now unless it's for a DWI or a violent offense. There are a lot of people being cited and released or just saving the charges for later because the jails don't want to have inmates that they're responsible for. And as you're bringing, you may have a jail that is COVID free, but as you're bringing inmates off the street, you have to quarantine them for 14 days. And then you've got this unknown element. You might have disease in your jail. So that combined with the courts aren't doing very many. They're doing 0 in-person hearings right now in this area. And you can do video pleas for some things, but I've been told that Texas Department of Criminal Justice isn't accepting inmates right now. So even if you had a client that wanted to take his time and go to prison, apparently the state isn't accepting the prisoners right now either. So the whole system's kind of busted. You compound that with the governor issued an executive order that you couldn't do PR bonds anymore. PR bond is where you tell an inmate, hey, you're in jail, but we think we can find you pretty easy, because that's the point of bail. It's not punitive. It's just so that we can make sure you show up for court. PR bond just basically means we think we can probably find you pretty easy. Come back when we ask you to. And the governor said we can't do those anymore. So anybody that's in jail is actually going to have to come up with money, either for a cash bond or a surety bond, to get out. So the jails are very reluctant to start putting people in because they don't have a mechanism to let them out in the event we got to a spot where they were full.
So what is the logic behind doing away with the PR bond?
Well, there were some counties, and rightfully so. I understand why they thought they needed to undo that. Some counties were just willy-nilly letting people out of jail, and they were larger counties, and it certainly did not happen in this area. I can tell you that for personal experience. No jail in this area was just wholesale letting people out. But some of the larger jails saw the COVID kind of increasing and decided they wanted to just get out from under that liability and just started willy-nilly cutting people loose.
So it's better to have the out roaming around infecting the rest of society than just being in one spot.
Well, and I'm not even as worried about their infecting society with the COVID. They're out infecting society with their crimes.
Plus the crimes.
Plus the COVID. They're a twofer whenever you get victimized by one of those people now.
I guess I don't understand the logic of them letting people out of jail because they might get COVID. They've got free health care while they're in jail. They've got doctors.
And they're, by definition, they're quarantined.
Exactly.
But that was the governor, and that was the war between those larger metropolitan areas and the governor. And so it had an inadvertent consequence on us because they actually use PR bonds quite a bit. If you have somebody with a severe health condition, cancer, leukemia, or if someone's pregnant, many times a jail will say, hey, is this person really worth keeping for what we're about to have to spend in health care on this for the county? Can't we let them go, or are they really a danger? Let's look at what their offense is. Should we keep them in? And if they're a dangerous person, 100% that person needs to stay in jail. If they're a habitual violator of property crimes, that the second you let them out, they're going to go start busting windows again. Yeah, you probably ought to keep them in. But you've got people that are passing through that aren't even from this area that, might have committed some sort of crime, or they have a traffic ticket that they didn't pay, something like that, and they all of a sudden find themselves locked up in jail and unable to get out because of the circumstance they're in. So,
Yeah. Well, I've always wondered why. I think jail could be overused a little bit. Maybe there's a better way to punish people than put everybody. If they're not violent, does it make sense to lock these people up?
well, the real thing is, I mean, if you look at the jails, a lot of people are in there that haven't been judged guilty of anything.
Right.
They've just been merely accused, and we get not guilties all the time. We get dismissals all the time. People make mistakes. People lie. The victims in some cases just flat make things up. And so, as long as you start the conversation about jail with some of these people might be not guilty, then I think you start the conversation with a better grasp of what we need to do and what jail is for. If you look at jail as a punitive measure that we're going to punish you and keep you in here until you have your trial, I think you're going about it all the wrong reason. You're certainly going about it unconstitutionally if that's what you're doing. But I think you would have a much better outcome if you say, okay, let's look at this. You're presumed not guilty. Let's do the least interaction with you as we can to make sure you show up and to make sure that you don't do this to anybody else, while at the same time respecting that you haven't been convicted by a jury or your peers for anything.
Right. Yeah, I just think if somebody's in there for a non-violent crime, so they're not really a risk to the health and safety of others, why warehouse them in jail until their trial? To me, jail should be only to hold people until you mete out their punishment.
Yeah.
Not be the punishment.
Well, until you decide whether they even get a punishment.
Exactly.
And the problem is that it's become a multi-billion-dollar business, and if you really look at the numbers, people that have money can get out of jail, and people that don't have money don't get out of jail, and that's a poor way to run the system also.
Yeah. It's not fair.
Yeah. And I don't have a solution, and I don't know what the solution is, but it definitely deserves somebody to look at it and figure out if there is a better way to do it.
Well, that's good. Why should voters choose you over your opponent?
Well, the voters who are likely to watch this should choose me because I'm the more conservative candidate out of the two. But to answer the question just why voters should choose me, it's because the court does more than 50% of criminal business. And I've devoted my entire career to criminal work. That's what I've done. I've done the work of the court my entire career. And it's the hard cases that they're going to hear. If you go down to the courthouse any particular day and watch what's happening when the COVID isn't on, you would see criminal hearings. You would see some family law hearings. The days of long drawn-out civil trials are over. None of the businesses, none of the insurance companies want to take the risk of multi-billion-dollar verdicts. They all settle things out of court. They all come to agreements with lawsuit reform. Some things aren't even getting filed anymore. And so the business is criminal work. And right now, we don't have anybody on the court that has done criminal work as both a prosecutor and a defense attorney. And I've got substantial experience on both sides of that. I come into that court with experience as a prosecutor putting people in jail and prison, and I've got experience in getting those people out. And I think that if you're going to, in effect, the justices act as a referee that says, this is the on-field playback kind of thing, and we're looking in a box to see if the referee made the right call or not. And the best referees are people that have played the game. I think. You could hand somebody a book about baseball or basketball or football and say, here, learn these rules and then come ref this game. And you're probably going to get them knowing the rules pretty well if they take it serious. But you're not going to get them comfortable with the application of the rules because they never stood on the field. They've never had the pressure of the game with them. They don't know what it's like to be there with the cheering and the yelling and the jeering and the mosquitoes and the heat. And one of the disturbing parts about that for me as a criminal practitioner is one of the standards that they use in criminal law is harmless error. In other words, you get to the court, you make an argument that the court messed up. The Court of Appeals says, yeah, this court messed up. They shouldn't have done this at all. And then the court proceeds to use an analysis to tell you, but that didn't matter. It didn't have any effect on it at all. And right now, you don't have anybody that has that substantial criminal experience reviewing those cases. And it's come to insane results in other jurisdictions. You can look up a case where a defense lawyer fell asleep at trial counsel table, was actually sitting there with his head down snoring during a trial, and the appellate courts said, well, you know what? That might have been his strategy to show that he really didn't care about this witness and the jury shouldn't either. And they actually said that was a legitimate trial strategy and it had to go farther up because of that. Eventually, thank God that they came to a court that said, this is nuts. You can't sleep while you're defending someone. What are you guys thinking? But it's things like that that you get these crazy results. And I think a lot of the frustration, with some of the left, I'm not certainly not advancing their cause, but I think some of the frustration with their ideas about the police are cases like that, where you say, well, good grief, we try and assert our rights in the courts, and you say it's okay that my lawyer that you appointed to me fell asleep. How am I supposed to have justice with a lawyer that acts like that? I'm entitled to a competent lawyer under the Sixth Amendment, and somebody sleeping is not that. And so I think you can probably get back to a place where you can at least tell the left, you say, look, these people are doing a fine job for people accused of crimes, regardless of their party, liberal, conservative, whatever. We're proud of what's happening in the court system, and we're not trying to tell you that it's okay that your lawyer fell asleep just because we're trying to protect the system. We really need, whenever something happens wrong, you need to call it wrong, and that's what this court is about. It's about making sure that the laws are applied as written, that they're applied constitutionally, and that you don't stray outside of that. You don't say, my personal feeling is that this ought to be the law, so I'm going to hold it that way. And that's been a big thing that I've campaigned on as well. I certainly dislike judicial activism. If you're familiar with the Federalist Society, I'm a founding member of the Amarillo chapter. As soon as the federal judge got up here, I was right on board with helping establish that and being a member of that. I believe that laws are made to be passed by the legislature, and if you want to do that, you go vote for Dr. Jackson or Josh Weingarten or whoever your choice is, but that's who you're choosing them for. I'm not telling you that I would be a good lawmaker at all, and I don't want to be a lawmaker. I want to look at the law and tell you, okay, well, this is what they meant when they applied it. We look at the judicial history of it. We look at their notes whenever they were arguing on the floor. We look at all those things, and if we can't figure out what they mean, we tell them that. We say, this doesn't make any sense, or this is unconstitutional. You guys didn't consider these other things whenever you pass this, and you can't do that. The courts oftentimes go farther than that, and they say, well, it's not clear what you meant, so we're going to do what we want, and now all of a sudden you have a law in effect that couldn't have been passed by legislatures over and over and over, and all of a sudden now you've had, in the case of the Supreme Court, 5 justices who were never elected to anything, all of a sudden legislating for an entire country, and that is unacceptable. Man, I went all the way around. I don't even know what the question was. We'll have to
Well,
play
we-
it back to figure
well-
out what you even asked me.
Well, I think what I asked you was, why should people vote for you over your opponent? And basically, I think what you're telling him is, because you're going to apply the law as it is written and not make law.
100%. That's not even a question.
And a whole separate issue, it just occurred to me, what do you think about the push for a public defender for Potter County?
You know, we have public defender here. It's just not set up in an office. For those that don't know, what happens now? A person gets arrested and sent to jail, and they can ask for a court-appointed attorney if they want. And the jail is set up to ask them that. The system here is voluntary. There's a group of people that say we are willing to get extra criminal hours in our continuing education. We are willing to certify that we will keep up those hours. We will agree to meet with the client or contact the client within a certain period of time. We will do all these things. And so there's a voluntary list, and it's based on level of offense, starting with misdemeanors and going up all the way to capital felonies. Right now, that list has probably 40 or 50, maybe 70 or 80 people on it, depending on which level it is. And there are very few people at the top levels, at the first-degree felony and the capital felony level. There's only 4 or 5 people that were even on the appeals list. And so what you're getting is an attorney like me who's been a lawyer for 20 years, who makes plenty of money defending people on hired cases, but feels like I owe a duty to help people out that can't afford a lawyer like me. And so I'm on the list, and I may make, $500 or $600 off of a felony case through the county, where if that person came into my office, I would have charged them $5,000 or $6,000 to do the same job. So, my opinion, you're getting a great representation on many of these cases that you're not going to be able to get hiring somebody straight out of law school for a public defender's office. There have been several entities really pushing for that. And I think some of them are actually doing it for selfish reasons, because here's the perception. Right now, if you go to jail and you get assigned to me, you're happy as a goat. You got a great deal. You got a great lawyer. I'm going to do a great job for you. You couldn't have paid for me no matter how much money you gathered from your family. And so you get a great outcome. If you get assigned to a public defender's office, you're not coming to Steve's nice office with the nice furniture and the friendly secretary and the nice parking lot and the landscaping and all that, and I offer you a drink when you come back if you want a Diet Coke. You don't get that. You get the government experience. And you sit in a dirty waiting room and you go talk to a lawyer whose law license ink is still dripping down the paper, and he can't answer your questions, or she's not familiar with your case because there's a stack of 100 on her desk and doesn't have time. And so what you do is you go, oh my God, this is my life. I got to get out of here and hire a lawyer. And so my hired business is likely to go through the roof, but I don't want to advocate for a public defender's office because I'm going to get rich off of it. That's the wrong thing to do. I really like the system we have. I think the system we have is cheaper than what they're willing to spend on their hybrid office, which they decided to pass. We had a member on the committee, but I think that member moved away, and we didn't even really know it was coming up for a vote. The thing passed at Commissioner's Court, and next thing we know, we saw it on the news, and all of us were saying, well, wait, what happened here? So I'm anxious to see how it works. I hope it works well. Lubbock has a system that they use that is similar, but Lubbock's system is very, very expensive and has a lot of parts to it, and they did not provide for that in the Amarillo Potter County system. And on top of that, Randall County didn't join it at all. So you're just talking about Potter County cases.
So Randall County does it the way we were doing it?
Yeah, Randall County's keeping that. And really there's some sort of metric that they're using. They're going to give misdemeanor cases and then really serious cases to these brand new lawyers. And so I don't really know how that's going to work out either. I think maybe the higher end cases, the first degree felonies, are probably the ones that are costing the most money per client, but that's also because those people usually don't want to agree to go to prison for 35 or 40 years and insist on having a jury trial, and that means the lawyer has spent more time and has actually submitted a written bill documenting their time for that. But I think the county was getting an excellent value for their dollar. The interactions I had with people on the committee, I couldn't get them to explain to me what the problem was they were solving for. If it's because it's too expensive, the new system is more expensive. If it's because you weren't getting enough face-to-face time with your attorney, the new system doesn't solve for that. If it's because you weren't getting good attorneys on the system, the new system is worse than that. And so I couldn't really get an answer on what was the problem we're solving for. It was just we needed to solve it.
So there may not have been a problem. So we may be solving a problem that didn't exist.
From my perspective, there wasn't a problem that needed to be solved with that drastic of a measure. I hope it works, though. Any time we can get better representation for the citizen accused, I'm behind that, because everyone should be behind that. You should want people like me defending people accused of crimes, because if your prosecutor has done a good job, if your police officer and your police department have done a good job and they've investigated it, there is very little that I'm going to be able to do to undo that. And if you're going to take someone's freedom or their liberty, or in some cases their life from them, you want to be that certain that not only have we investigated it properly, but we gave them the best attorney we could stand to give them to make sure to test every bit of that. Because that's pretty serious business, taking away somebody's freedom.
Well, and if you have a public defender and you have a publicly paid prosecutor, I mean, that can run into a big problem just with, that's a ripe, to me, for corruption.
Well, they've got separate offices. They're not, the same boss, but they're getting their money from the same commissioner's court. And it's my understanding they did not fund the public defender's office at the same level they fund the DA's office. So there's always going to be arguments that one is getting an unfair advantage over the other. And
yeah, I don't think we have the problem here in West Texas, but in a lot of places you have a big problem with prosecutor, running over clients. So to me, that client or the defendant needs to have the best representation he can get.
Sure.
To keep that from
happening. And if you can't afford it, we need to have a good system in place to make sure they have competent. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope that some really great applicants come up and want to do that job. And I hope that happens. I hope we get the best system ever, and they prove me wrong, and I'll eat crow. That's what I hope happens.
Well, I guess if this COVID keeps up, we won't have any cases, and it'd be a great job.
No, right now there's really very little going on.
Yeah.
So I guess they're all doing a great job at this point.
Well, I guess everybody's staying home and not committing any crime.
I wish that were true. I wish.
Well, all right. Is there anything you'd like to tell the voters before we wrap it up?
I'll tell you this. Like me, don't like me, vote for me, don't vote me. Go vote. The most disappointing thing that I'm facing in this is that 91,000 people came out and voted, and 41,000 or so of them voted for me, and I love that. What a great feeling. And here we are in the runoff, and our numbers are not going to be anywhere like that. I mean, with the COVID on, I don't know if we're going to have 10,000, 15,000 maybe. It's just so disappointing. So educate yourselves, get out and vote, and everybody that hears this, if you like what I said, if you want to go vote for me, grab your friends, take 10 people with you. It would be a victory to me, even if I lost. It would be a victory to me if 92,000 people came out and voted. I would be giddy as I've ever been if more people voted in the runoff, even if I lost, just because the system worked and everyone got their voice heard.
Yeah, if all 1,200 people in those two counties show up and vote, wouldn't that be great?
I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah.
I was in one of the counties just the other day, and they had 12 people so far.
Yeah, that's just boggles. That just, of course, as a county chair, I just struggle with ways to get people to understand how important it is to vote, to get into their head and to make them understand the power, really, that they have as individuals. Your vote is a great equalizer. Your vote is the same as Josh Weingarner's or Dr. Jackson's or Melania Trump's or Donald Trump's. We are 100% equal in this country. We
Yeah.
are all the same, and we all have the same exact power.
Yeah.
But if we don't exercise it, we're abdicating that to somebody that we don't know.
Well, I'll tell you, and this is, you know, you probably don't get to toot your own horn on this show much, but, you know, what's important is having a county chair that's involved. And you've done a great job with that. You've really gone out of your way to get people involved, to spread the conservative message, to get conservative candidates to run for things where there's not been in the past, just because that neighborhood isn't our neighborhood. And that's not the way to look at things. And so I, as a candidate, appreciate that you were so involved that if you got a sample ballot in Amarillo, Texas, and Potter County, you know your candidates, you know who's involved. And even though I don't file with your office, I file with the state, you knew what offices were up. And so a really involved county chair would have caught these errors and would have said, wait a minute, this isn't right. And I'm confident with this office that wouldn't have happened. And I appreciate that as a candidate of not only outreach, but the personal involvement that you have with all the candidates and knowing who your slate is and having a good feeling that you have good conservative candidates to help keep the most conservative area of Texas that way, because it certainly could slip away if we don't pay attention to it.
People do not understand how the system works. And if you don't have a county chair in a county, you don't have a primary, which means you don't have any county offices on the ballot.
Yeah,
And that happens all over the state.
yeah.
And
It does. The Democrats have all sorts of places. They don't even have a candidate, not because they don't have one to run, because they can't put one on
Right.
in those counties.
So people need to understand how the system works, and part of what I'm trying to do with this is to educate the voters and get this out to the voters so they can begin to take an interest. But they don't know what's going on because the party has never put forth the effort to engage the voters.
Right.
And I'm trying to change that because I think it's incumbent upon us as party officers to educate the voter and let them make a decision and help the candidates. If they file in the Republican Party, I'm going to help them.
Sure.
And let the voters decide, because it's up to the voters. So every voter that wants to have an opinion and get informed, we want to help them get informed, and we want to make it easy for them to get that information so that they can make a good decision and show up and vote, because that's how you change the country. It's not done at the national level.
No.
It's not done at the state level. It is done right at every county and precinct level within that county. You can have a tremendous effect if people will participate in their county. If you take care of your county, everything else falls into place.
Yeah.
But everybody focuses on the national stuff because that's what's in the news.
Yeah, there's 20,000 undervotes or
It's
something.
glamorous,
Yeah,
but it's not glamorous at the county level, but that's what's so important.
it is.
So,
Thank you for all you do.
oh, no problem.
You're working the front lines for that. For, I guess just the title, I guess, is all they pay you with, huh?
Yeah, and it's not that. It's just I didn't want to see Potter County disappear from the Republican Party.
I don't either. So thank you.
So to me, it's not that hard. It just takes a little bit of effort,
It's
and it's fun.
It's a lot of effort. You're doing a lot of effort. I know what you do. It's a lot of effort. we're sitting in your building that you've remodeled specifically to do a nice podcast. So you've done a lot. So thanks
Well,
for that.
We've got more coming, and I think it's going to be huge.
Good. It's exciting.
All right, Stephen. Well, I appreciate you coming today,
Yeah,
and
thanks,
good luck
Dan.
out there, and good luck on the campaign trail.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right.